Good morning, good afternoon, welcome ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wayne Burke and it gives me great pleasure to bring you Build Your Skills for Cyber Threat Intel and Defense Tactics in 2022. Now unfortunately, as I'm not able to travel to Egypt to actually deliver this in person, the next best thing was for me to shoot back to the office and start recording a video to ensure nobody's going to be losing out on gaining some new skills for 2022. So let's jump straight in with the fundamentals of what we're going to cover today. So how can we build and grow the skills we need for cyber threat intel? How do we build the defense tactics? Well, we're going to look at building different types of methodologies, playbooks, and we're going to be learning the skills with new open source tools. So if we learn how to use the open source tools that are free, and we go into a job and a company that uses a specific threat intel platform, you should be able to work on that cyber threat intel platform when you've learned the skills on an open source platform as an example. So this is a 99% practical hands-on workshop with very few slides. We're going to just go through some of the fundamentals with a few slides, and then we're going to be jumping straight in and actually doing it. The learning objectives for the next 90 minutes, and of course, as I mentioned, this is a practical workshop. So we'll be defining what is your threat intel or your cyber threat intelligence. We'll look at the various different basic forms of threat intelligence. How are we going to use the information and the data that we would gather to be applied to red team engagements as an example? Or of course, how are we going to be running certain level 1, level 2 security operations center personnel that will then connect with the cyber threat intel. So obviously working hand in hand with your security operations center personnel, and that's going to be used for us to create a threat intel driven campaign and capability. We'll be using various different types of frameworks to better understand the concepts and leverage threat intelligence. We'll be setting up open source tools, an array of open source tools that we typically use in security operations centers, cyber threat intel solutions, and we'll be looking at some of the ISAC and the indicators of compromise data as an example. We'll discuss consuming your cyber threat intel and how we collect the TTPs, your tactics, techniques, and procedures. And we'll be looking at the Tiber EU framework. And then finally, we'll look at a final challenge of threat intel driven campaigns. So you'll actually look at applying the knowledge we would have obviously gained today. And then we'll be giving you an array of various different types of open source and free tools, including remote range, cyber ranges that you can actually utilize every day to practice your cyber skills, specifically in cybersecurity, not just in threat intel. All right, now we've got to speak about how we actually learn, because certifications do not always include the skills. Now, the certification normally you're going to include the body of knowledge, right? Your theoretical knowledge, the information you generally want to read out of a book. Most people go to lectures and they let the presenter read the slides to them, right? So this is the problem, because when we look at reading, as we map it to the cone of learning, after 2 weeks, we tend to remember only 10% of what we read or 20% of what we hear. So today, as you'll see, we're going to be focusing on the active form of learning, all the way at the bottom here. So 2 weeks later, we're going to remember 90% of what we do by trying to do the real thing. So skills really require repetitive practice. Don't go along and do the same lab against the same target machine, because the more you do it, you're not going to get varied experience, right? So you want to try and use the same tool in different circumstances, different scenarios, different challenges. Now remember, nobody's saying certifications are bad in any way, shape or form. Everything has its place in our learning path. Now the problem, obviously, is people take the certification, but then they don't continue the learning cycle, right? So they've got to keep practicing. So we have to learn the theory, read the book, continue to obviously then reflect, implement, and share. So when we look at the book, that's the input. We want to learn. Right now, of course, when we learn, yes, you get the initial input by the theoretical knowledge, but then when we go and reflect what we've read in the book, we go and implement, share, set up different target systems, set up what we've learned, reinforce what we've learned, right? So that's the output. And we want to focus a lot more on the output, because that's how we become masters at our tradecraft, by practicing with the technology, building our skills, and it's continuous repetition. So I suppose it's pretty simple to realize that we have shortage of skills. Why? Because a lot of people get lazy and they don't keep practicing, right? That's the repetition. So if you don't exercise regularly, your body's going to become weak. So as they say, use it or lose it. You got to keep practicing those skills to keep enhancing them. And there's plenty of free resources, tools, open source software, and even free cyber ranges where you can actually just simply use a browser and get your hands dirty every day practicing your tradecraft. What is cyber threat intelligence? Well, basically, to summarize, it's collecting of information, data, that's going to be used, to better understand the threats, the threat actors, and that's going to then help you mitigate harmful events. So the cyber threat intel sources are going to include open source, social media, human intelligence, technical intelligence, intelligence that would have been gathered from the dark web. All right, now let's jump in and get our hands dirty. We're going to go and set up our toolkits. Now this is depending on obviously if you have your laptops and how much information you have available to set this up or what your background is. But we're going to show you an easy way and a more complex way, or a complex way and then an easy way, whichever way it might fit for you. But we're going to start by setting up your own virtual machine. We're going to go and look at downloading the Remnux from remnux.org. It is a malware reverse engineering system, and that was initially a project, it still is, by Lenny Zeltzer from the SANS Institute. So let's go along and head over to setting up Remnux, and then we'll be looking at tryhackme.com, where you can actually access free tutorials, free ranges, and practice every day for an hour a day, even with a free account. Alrighty, so essentially once you've downloaded Remnux, you follow those basic instructions for whatever virtualization platform you're using. I'm using VMware Workstation Pro. All I had to do was extract the virtual machine or import the OVA and then basically boot up the virtual machine. And that's exactly what we've done. I would obviously always recommend make sure you go along and you do your updates. So your typical updates. So there we're just going to go and do a quick check to see if we've got all the updates. And there we go, my system's fully updated. I did just do an update before jumping on to recording this. So we've got all the latest versions of those tools. Now let's take a look at the tryhackme.com website. Just a few notes. I am in no way, shape or form affiliated to tryhackme.com people. There were a group of university folks that designed and developed this, I believe. And I'm here just to obviously share some of the amazing resources that are available for even free. So some of the rooms that we're going to be showing you today are free, whilst others do require a monthly paid subscription, I believe, of $10 a month. So if we go down to your Learning tab, once you've logged into TryHackMe, and you go down to Cyber Defense as an example, you can see you can go ahead and obviously upgrade to your paid premium. But even without the paid premium, many of you are still going to be able to learn a whole lot without actually even paying to learn. So as an example, if you go along and look at the Introduction to Networking room, and this is going to be a free room, you will be able to use the in-browser appliance, the Linux machine, by clicking Start the attack box. And if there's a server that you've got to try and practice against, as an example, there'll be another option there to start the actual server. So this is where you are, I believe, with a free account allowed to access the virtual appliance for 1 hour a day. But you're also able to go along and look at actually VPNing into the environment as well. As you can see, they've got an array of information. So as an example, if I go along and click on the, yes, I've read the introduction, you're going to click on I've completed that. It's going to now say, great, you've completed one question a day. So some of the rooms require you to actually have a streak where you've got to log in for 7 days at a time. And that's the part where, depending on how much you've done, you'll get access to more resources if you obviously dedicate your time. And as you go through the different resources, you can see everything from the theoretical information and then all the way down into some of the actual questions and actually doing some of the hands-on. So looking at like the networking tools, good old ping, trace route, whois, dig. Well, as you'll see, it will give you very in-depth explanation and allow you to go along and actually practice this against different types of resources. Looking at trace route as an example, whois tools, and then of course was just giving you a few examples there. So nothing too complex there, obviously showing you some of the free resources and the free tools that you can make use of. You want to go ahead and of course register for an account. Some of the content I'm going to be covering today is going to be focused on the hands-on, but obviously you're going to be able to follow up with a lot of the different tools that you can actually utilize to practice and enhance your own cyber threat intel skills. Now let's take a look at the tryhackme.com website. Just a few notes. I am in no way, shape or form affiliated to tryhackme.com people. There were a group of university folks that designed and developed this, I believe. And I'm here just to obviously share some of the amazing resources that are available for even free. So some of the rooms that we're going to be showing you today are free, whilst others do require a monthly paid subscription, I believe of $10 a month. So if we go down to your learning tab, once you've logged into TryHackMe, and you go down to cyber defense as an example, you can see you can go ahead and obviously upgrade to your paid premium. But even without the paid premium, many of you are still going to be able to learn a whole lot without actually even paying to learn. So as an example, if you go along and look at the introduction to networking room, and this is going to be a free room, you will be able to use the in-browser appliance, the Linux machine, by clicking Start the attack box. And if there's a server that you've got to try and practice against, as an example, there'll be another option there to start the actual server. So this is where you are, I believe, with a free account allowed to access the virtual appliance for 1 hour a day. But you're also able to go along and look at actually VPNing into the environment as well. As you can see, they've got an array of information. So as an example, if I go along and click on the, yes, I've read the introduction, you're going to click on I've completed that. It's going to now say, great, you've completed one question a day. So some of the rooms require you to actually have a streak where you've got to log in for 7 days at a time. And that's the part where, depending on how much you've done, you'll get access to more resources if you obviously dedicate your time. And as you go through the different resources, you can see everything from the theoretical information and then all the way down into some of the actual questions and actually doing some of the hands-on. So looking at like the networking tools, good old ping, trace route, whois, dig. Well, as you'll see, it will give you very in-depth explanation and allow you to go along and actually practice this against different types of resources. Looking at trace route as an example, whois tools, and then of course was just giving you a few examples there. So nothing too complex there, obviously showing you some of the free resources and the free tools that you can make use of. You want to go ahead and of course register for an account. Some of the content I'm going to be covering today is going to be focused on the hands-on, but obviously you're going to be able to follow up with a lot of the different tools that you can actually utilize to practice and enhance your own cyber threat intel skills. This next little demo, we're going to head over to edx.org and we're going to go along and search for the CS50 courses. And as you'll see in the search results there, we've got the Harvard University CS50 Introduction to Computer Science. So that is literally an entire course, 12 weeks, 6 to 18 hours per week, self-paced, progress at your free own speed, and obviously an optional upgrade to actually get a certificate completion or a completion certificate. And of course, very important about what you'll learn. So this is giving you the fundamentals. So when people don't understand programming, they've got to really ensure that they understand the term computer science and how that affects everything that you might be thinking about doing, right? So how to think algorithmically, solve programming problems efficiently, concepts like abstraction, algorithms, data structures, and of course you can read more about that yourselves. You can see some amazing instructors. And David J. Mellon, this is such an energetic professor. You've got to take our hats off to folks that put so much into bringing information to people so that they can better understand. So without further ado, we're going to jump into a quick demonstration, a short snip from one of his initial courses, so that it gives you a little bit more insight. We're making this more interactive, making sure I leave you all with a path of what you need to do to ensure you're going to succeed and gain better skills in the cyber threat intel industry, because we are short of skilled cybersecurity professionals. So we need the skills. Certifications are important, but you've also got to have the skills that come along with, being able to have the theoretical knowledge. You should be able to also do that job and not just say, well, I read the book and I passed an exam. That doesn't mean you can actually do it. There's far too many people that have just got a certificate, and you bring them into an interview and you ask them to show you what they can do and they don't have a single clue what to do. Well, that's the issue. We have a shortage of skilled professionals. We don't have a shortage of certified people, but many of those certified people do not actually have the skills to do that job. Now let's take a look at the tryhackme.com website. Just a few notes. I am in no way, shape or form affiliated to tryhackme.com people. There were a group of university folks that designed and developed this, I believe. And I'm here just to obviously share some of the amazing resources that are available for even free. So some of the rooms. Alrighty, so next up we're going to be taking a look at the Cyber Threat Intel Playbook. We basically want to set up our notes. So if you're going to be learning anything, you need to be taking notes. This is free application called Cherry Tree. If you Google, you'll go and find many places to download it. Make sure you download it from the Saipan something website. That's the core developer. Otherwise, you might be downloading a backdoor copy. But you can install Cherry Tree in Linux, in Apple, Mac, and Windows. So we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of, well, as we learn and we go through, maybe you're going to go and look at TryHackMe. And one of the rooms we'll be going through in a few examples will be the Red Team Threat Intel. So I've gone ahead and just gone along and created a new tree, which is basically like the root. And so if you go along and look at the tree, you can create a new node and you can go along and create subnodes. So the subnode there, we're going to be looking at the CTI intro as an example. And as you'll see, we're going to just be building some of our information as we go through and we build and we do things. We want to make sure we take note of what we're doing and how we're doing things effectively. So we're going to remember what we're doing. So let's say I'm going to go along and grab information and use resources from the TryHackMe Red Team Threat Intel room. I'm going to always make sure I put note of where I got the information from. And here we're just going to go along and be copying information directly from their site or whatever you want to do. Obviously, this is just showing you the intro. So you can either just copy the text or you can take a screenshot and then you can just go ahead and paste the screenshot. So let me go and take a screenshot. I'm not flipping back and forth to the site, so we're going to just try and streamline this, keep this as quick as possible. We're just showing you some examples of obviously how to do things. And these are just, threat intel, cyber threat intel, the TTPs, your tactics, techniques, and procedures. And as we dive deeper in, we want to define what is threat intelligence. And threat intelligence obviously is gathering of information. We defined that earlier on. But we basically want to be taking intelligent information and then put it into a repository where we're going to be able to add and enrich that information with things like indicators of compromise and also the newer term now, indicators of an attack. So we're going to be basically putting that in our information and sharing analysis centers. I'll be showing you how to set up a free MISP project in a Docker container as we go through this, so everybody will be able to really understand the cyber threat intel by going through and enriching your ISACs, your information and sharing analysis centers, or your MISP, your malware information sharing platforms, and all sorts of different names that we see nowadays. But when we do it, we really truly understand we need to be focusing on advanced persistent threat actors, your APTs basically. So you'll see actually if we go along and just copy some of the actual text from the actual Try Hack Me room, a lot of times they've got a whole lot of additional resources that you can actually access. Like here you can see exactly what we're just speaking about. There's links to other resources where you can go along and link to other rooms or specific industry resources like white papers or tutorials and so forth. Now when we go along and we look at applying your threat intel for a specific red team, as previously mentioned, remember the red team will leverage your cyber threat intel. It's going to be used to help aid in your adversary emulation, as well as potentially support evidence of an adversary's behavior, and then to aid your, consuming your cyber threat intel and then collecting the TTPs. Your red teams will often use your cyber threat intel platforms, your frameworks, such as you're going to hear us speak a lot more about MITRE ATT&CK. We'll be taking you through a quick overview of the initial Uber hack that's just happened a few days ago. And we'll also be able to use the Tiber.eu framework or the OST map. So Tiber, however you folks want to pronounce it, routers, routers. I've grown up in multiple countries, so I don't intend to offend anybody. I always want to respect everybody's beliefs. So if I do offend you because of my bad pronunciation of some of the terms, yeah, that's not my fault. That's me trying to, speak an international English version. But we'll keep the humor and the jokes to minimal. Right now, I think I should cover a little bit more detail as to why this has been happening. But when we look at the Tiber or Tiber, like we've mentioned, however you want to say that, the European Framework for Threat Intelligence-Based Ethical Red Teaming is what it actually stands for. So there's a lot of folks that are obviously backing this. It's one of the most ambitious cybersecurity initiative ever launched by the regulator. So this is looking at like organizations like HSBC, JP Morgan, Equifax, and obviously a whole long slew. So the list of banks and financial institutions attacked by hostile actors in recent years is endless. The phenomenon is clearly choral and is growing. Well, what I want to point out, folks, is it is logical where there is money, there will always be bad guys. But let's go along and look at the reality behind this, because the way they're trying to pull this out of the works is because, they, want to stop the cyber threat actors. What about the banks being criminals themselves, perhaps? I'm just saying that's part, it's not me. I'm going to just show you information, right? I'm just doing the cyber threat intel. All right, now I'm not going to be picking on HSBC Bank specifically. This is just that they happen to be on the first of the list, and I don't want to be going through all the other history of some of the other organizations, but we're going to look at HSBC because it is one of the largest banks in Europe by total assets worth almost 3 trillion as of December 2021. And if we go along and we look down to some of the issues they may have encountered, they don't seem to be issues that are caused by hackers. They seem to be issues caused by executives that are not following the regulations, that are maybe not following their technology. So let's just take a quick look at a scenario like, where was this? Where they were fined $1.9 billion for money laundering. I'm just thinking, this is not kind of what the whole new, Tiber is probably aimed for, but I think you can clearly see there what the issue is there. So HSBC bank officials repeatedly ignored internal warnings that HSBC's monitoring systems were inadequate. And so that meant, well, you can go and read more about this. I have to say that I don't necessarily agree with why they've come out with these new amazing, ambitious cybersecurity initiatives because, yeah, I think we can see the fear that the incident could take on a global dimension and destabilize the system has become a reality. So much so that in Europe, for example, the European Central Bank is the one who launched this project. Isn't that interesting? But as we realize, when we look at how much nearly $2 billion could feed poor people in poor countries, yeah, I'm not going to go down that road. We're talking about cyber threat intel here, folks, but we needed to give you a little bit more enriched information with the difference between the MITRE attack. So we got a lot of different frameworks that we can use. So let's go along and check out our MITRE. Isn't that pretty funny? Why air travel is uniquely terrible right now. Yes, we're not going to go and talk about that, because if you miss your flight or you have a problem where there's a connection that is, off by, a 20-minute time and you don't get that, you kind of not going to find another flight in the same day. And that's just the reality nowadays, right? So if you go ahead and look at the attack.mitre.org website, amazing amounts of free information. It's a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics, techniques, and huge amounts of information that's based upon real-world observations. Now, this is crucial. There's so many newer elements to looking at some of the MITRE resources that are available. I'm not going to go through and try and sell you MITRE because it is free. I'm going to tell you to go along and work with it, play with it. And if you want to go through some scenarios to ensure you know how to use the tool, you can go along, and I believe the Try Hack Me folks have just released a new a room on MITRE attack. So that's free, I believe. And you can go along and practice all of your cyber threat intel by mapping it to a threat intel framework, such as the MITRE attack. Right, so the key point here is we're going to be able to use various different types of frameworks and maps, so we can obviously match all of the information to the targeted adversary. That way we're obviously going to better understand the TTPs and the indicators of compromise that we'll be looking at to implement into your MISP, your malware information sharing platform, or your general cyber threat intel platforms. And you can see some great links there for additional resources, white papers and whatnot. So any of you want more details, you've got them all where you can actually go and research them. Now next, when we take a look at your TTP mapping, obviously that's looking like your process of obviously mapping your TTPs. So you're going to be looking at some of the elements like the target industry, what types of attack vectors do they employ, country of origin, and various other factors. Now this example here is showing the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat Group 39, which was found to be doing a lot of cyber espionage run by the Iranian ministry. But of course, this is just some of the additional examples. Now you'll see you could also go along and actually go and practice using MITRE by using the MITRE attack room. I believe that is free. And of course, you can go along and watch a lot of different types of traditional YouTube videos, right? Where you're going to go along and watch somebody's video and follow along, whatever obviously works for you folks. And we can take a quick look at the OST map. So the TTP framework is OST map. So that's where you're going to see always validate and cross-reference some of the tools and the frameworks you're going to be using to make sure everything is as good as it could be. So there's a various array of other open source and enterprise threat intel platforms that can obviously help, but that was just showing you a nice little example of the OST map. So if we have a look at going through the navigator layer in the MITRE attack, you can obviously go ahead and assign various TTPs that we want to obviously employ during the engagement. And this is just a compiled kill chain with the mapped TTPs that's obviously relevant to the APT39 group. And you can see how well that information is well sorted from the reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and actions on objectives. Now remember, the Lockhart-Martin kill chain requires us to kill one of the links in that chain to stop the attack. So some of the additional details for your red team use of cyber threat intel. This is where you're going to be perhaps using your command and control traffic, better understanding user agents, ports, protocols, listener profiles, malware and other types of tooling. What are the IOCs, the behaviors, and the indicators of an attack as well. So the first behavioral use of CTI will showcase command and control being pretty powerful. And as an example, looking at the wonderful, it was originally Cobalt Strike, which was owned by a different company. It's now been bought out, and you'll see some links from helpsystems.com. So we're looking at the malleable profiles as an example, where your malleable profiles are going to allow red team operators to control various different types of elements and aspects of your command and control traffic, right? So when you exploit a machine, it's going to be connected to a command and control server perhaps. So information to be implemented in the profile can be gathered from the ISACs and obviously the collected indicators of compromise, or even more specifically, which is always crucial if we have packet captures, that's going to help you amazingly. So we're also looking at things like host headers, post URLs, server responses and headers. And the traffic obviously is going to be then aided or used to aid the red team to make their traffic look similar. Remember, we've got to try and create the same kind of data that you could expect from real adversary attacks. That's what we call it. You know, the goal is adversary emulation. We try and copy what the malicious folks do to better understand the techniques. And so the second behavioral use of CTI for red teaming is obviously to analyze the behavior. The user behavior analytics is what we call it, and also the actions of the adversaries, the malware, tools, so we can better develop our offensive tooling so we can emulate the similar behaviors, and therefore you're going to be able to do a lot of your red team, blue team scenarios. So as an example of this could be an adversary using a custom dropper. So the red team can then emulate the dropper by better identifying the traffic, better understanding the syscalls and API calls, and also to better understand the behavior of the dropper and its objective. Like, is it diskless, fileless? And also tamper with the file signatures and those indicators of compromise. So there was a link there to the details on malleable C2 traffic. And there you can see the Cobalt Strike user guide. And then the final part there would be to bring it all together, where you want to actually look at your threat intel driven campaign. So this is where you'll go through answering quite a few questions in the Try Hack Me, and the threat intel driven campaign, as you can see, will take advantage and knowledge and topics previously covered and basically allow you to combine them to create a well-planned and researched campaign. Now the task flow in this room typically follows a process. So you want to identify a framework and a general kill chain. Then you want to look at determining the target adversary. Better identify the adversary's TTPs and IOCs. Then map gathered threat intel to a kill chain or framework. Draft and maintain the needed engagement documentation. And then determine and use needed engagement resources like tools, C2 modifications, domain names, and so forth. So in this task, you'll basically be walking through a red team's thought process from beginning to end of planning a threat intel driven campaign. And of course, there you could see to begin working the task, you'd need to go along and download those resources from the Try Hack Me website. And then you'll be actually using the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain to emulate APT41 as adversary that best fits the client's objectives and scope. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the complete summary from CTI introduction, the applying threat intel for a red team. We discussed various different types of frameworks, TTP mappings, various other uses of CTI for red teaming, and then also looking at the threat intel driven campaign. And of course, the conclusion is without doubt crucial. All right, so we've been looking at some amazing resources. Don't forget about the CS50 Harvard University free programming courses, as well as go and check out the wonderful freecodecamp.org. And then remember, as we looked at some of the various different types of learning pads available from the tryhackme.com, and of course you can be using the Remnux local virtual machine that we showed you how to set up and install, ready to go through one of the labs I'm going to be taking you through. We'll be setting up the MISP project, where you also actually have a room that you can go along and practice by deploying the MISP open source threat sharing platform. So there's a ton of things that we can still cover, of course, but we're limited with time, so we're going to try and jam in as much as we can to ensure we make the most of your time. Now remember, when we discussed the cyber threat intel, we're really looking at collecting information at three main levels: the strategic, operational, and tactical. And these amazing graphics are from John Hubbard, who's a SANS instructor. Great presentation. You'll find a lot of amazing short tutorials from John Hubbard's website or his YouTube channel. So looking at strategic, your highest level, broad information, relevant groups and goals, and really this is designed mainly for the decision makers, the C-level experts, the policies, procedures. Those are the folks that are all at the C-level executive branch. Then looking at the operational, right? So this is your mid-level details, more for short-term trends, TTPs, campaigns, compiled info. This is allowing you to typically build a bigger picture, a better overview, obviously based upon those indicators of compromise. And then looking at the actual tactical, this is where you normally have much lower level details and specifics. Things like wouldn't make sense to the strategic high level, C-level decision makers, executives there, when you're looking at indicators of compromise, the hashes, the IPs, domains, etc. And then of course used daily by the SOC for detection and the cyber threat intel teams. Now we're about to take you through a scenario where we're going to be looking at what Microsoft have been up to with regards to the dreaded SolarWinds or Nobelium, depending on obviously who you're speaking about, how you're speaking about it, because they want to mess up people's minds when it comes to the exact details, so that you don't remember who the vendors were who were responsible. And you're going to see the synopsis is that as amazing as our tools are, we have to remember one thing: our people, our human beings, our level 1, level 2, all of our engineers working in cyber threat intel, SOCs, cyber security centers, generally speaking, those are the folks that are most crucial, because there's always going to be new tools and techniques, but as you'll see, who actually figured out that something was a little off or a little bit weird for the SolarWinds? It wasn't the automated computer response system. It was a human being that recognized and looked at that. So they followed their intuition, folks, and that is perhaps one of the best forms of information you can remember. We have to invest in the capabilities of our people. All right, so we're going to start off speaking a little bit about the SolarWinds Nobelium, and we're going to take you through some examples from Microsoft's resources. You'll see a few minutes, we'll go through one of the 4 video interviews so you can get a little bit more insight. Therefore, it's not coming from my mouth, it's going to be coming from the horse's mouth, so to say. And of course, we're going to be focused on how do we actually go along and add these indicators of compromise to our threat intel platform. In our case, we're going to be using the free MISP project, the MISP project.org solution. So let's have a look at the first webpage, the Microsoft new sophisticated email-based attack from Nobelium. And that was from the Microsoft Threat Intel Center. So you're going to see some of the history, and you'll see a note there about it's still a case that's running. Obviously, there's continuous new data that's coming out from some of these attack vectors. It might be newer groups might be using it and so forth, but obviously you want to keep going because this campaign may be active still. So this is an active incident based upon the TTPs that may have been used here. And of course, we dive a bit deeper in, you'll see a lot more details like, oh, spear phishing campaign delivers nobelium payloads. So before we jump into talking about the technical specifics, as you're going to hear from some of the other presenters, you've heard very often that social engineering is one of the biggest risks, and that is still true, right? So the part of social engineering means that we have got a big issue. People in societies do not know how to differentiate between truth and fake information. I don't think I need to be explaining further to the group because I think you're pretty clear on what's transpired within your country's history. But remember, nowadays 70% of all data breaches are very much typically due to social engineering. So people need to understand how the human brain works. So before we jump into some spear phishing, talking about, socially engineering somebody to open up the door or the first entry point, right? This is the part we need to be much more efficient at better understanding the social engineering elements, because it's still a very, very high critical targeted attack technique that criminals like to use. So we'll take a look at Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is a doctor, not me, I'm not the expert. And he's going to help people understand how do we actually learn? So how does our brain function effectively? And remember, if we want to socially engineer somebody, you're going to have to understand how their brain works and the perception, the biology of belief. So that's the first part to cyber threat intelligence. What is intelligence? We need to look at the psychology of intelligence analysis, and we're going to take you through some great resources now. Right, folks, so that was a great presentation there, obviously helping you understand how you learn, how effective it is when you don't understand the psychology of intelligence. Now, the other video, we're not going to go and watch the 2.5 hour video on the biology of belief, but as we know, social engineering is still a very, very critical skill we need to be able to understand so we can better defend. So if you don't understand how you think and the psychology behind your belief, your perceptions, that's the expert you want to go along and watch his presentation. Amazing. That's really going to help you better understand what we're about to look at. And that is a nice threat intel briefing of the solar winds or nobelium. Right, so this is the hunt for nobelium, the most sophisticated nation-state attack in history. Well, obviously there's been a lot more attacks, and we don't need to go and look at depressing ourselves anymore for now. So we're going to just focus on the 4-part video series, and we can go through the first example so we can speak more specifically about the TTPs. All right, so that was episode 1. We're not going to go and watch the entire episode 2. We wanted to give you more of an insight because the whole chain of events that transpired is going to be what we're going to try and put together in our open source management interface, right? Our tool, typically called your Cyber Threat Intel platform. But as we'll go into some more of the details, we just wanted to show you the first minute of episode 2 so you can realize tools are amazing and tools are going to help us do our job better, but they will never do our job for us. And this is the part where I see one of the presentations was I'm surrounded by idiots. Well, unfortunately, it's not idiots. We're surrounded by people that are lazy and people that don't want to keep their skills up to date. People who live in the past, right? We got to live for the future because the past is not going to help our younger children that we are responsible for trying to establish a foundation for them to grow, for them to nourish, and of course, allow them to have the same types of opportunities that many of us have had. And that means we've got to be able to use technology where it's actually reliable and stable and not being hacked, as an example. Or we're not destroying the planet with our over consumption of bad technology that could be made more eco-friendly. So this is the part where we can all make a difference if we're not lazy. And that means we need to be dedicated and have fun while we're doing our job. Alrighty, so we want to wrap this up with let's go along and actually add our indicators of compromise to an open source threat intelligence platform. So let's review first of all some of the specific details of the actual SolarWinds attack. You can see it started with the spear phishing email. There was an HTML attachment. And of course, as we go deeper into the different elements, you're going to see there's breadcrumbs that's going to be literally trackable within certain types of technologies. If you have like an intrusion detection system and so forth, and you've been able to record some of that data, right? So in this instance, you could see some specific emails were used and email addresses. So we can add the email addresses to our indicators of compromise list. So we're going to obviously have various different types of breadcrumbs. We call those indicators of compromise. And finally, once you've gone through the final analysis, Typically what you're seeing right now is what cyber threat intel analysts would put together as a synopsis to the actual attack. How, what, when, what, techniques, tactics, and so forth were used. So going further deep through the actual list there, we can see some details about mitigations, and then there's the list of indicators of compromise. Now, for those of you who want to dive a lot deeper into different types of sources for indicators of compromise, if you are very gung-ho and very trustworthy of the Windows security, specifically with the network access, you should be looking at the Google Project Zero. This is the advanced Project Zero from Google, their reverse engineering advanced cybersecurity team. And you can go and read more about the latest and the greatest. So not just obviously picking on Windows there, you can see, but the last was looking at the Linux kernel and the garbage collection. So some amazing resources, of course, and there you can see the latest in 2022. So not just picking on one specific vendor. This is where we all have to work as a group of global community experts where we can share this information. And having said that, the best place to be able to share this information is going to be our open source. Malware was originally the name of this malware information sharing platform, and it's now generally used for cyber threat intel. As you can see, it's actually a project that was very well supported financially by the European agencies, I believe. And so you can see some of the key elements there and some of the reviews, news, articles, and there you can see it was co-financed by the European Union. So we're going to go ahead and actually install this, but we're going to be installing this where we can actually set it up in your Remnux virtual appliance, where we can actually set it up as a Docker container. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to be using the Cool Acid Docker MISP GitHub website. As you can see, a nearly production ready Dockered MISP. And we're going to go along and actually show you how to actually set this up, and then how you would go and add your indicators of compromise to a new event. All right, so we're going to go on to our Remnux virtual appliance, and we're going to go along and install it. So we'll head over to the Firefox. Now, if I didn't point this out, you'll actually see that Remnux has got an amazing amount of tools that you could use for reverse engineering. And of course, pre-installed, so it makes our life a lot easier. A lot of tools that are very helpful for threat intel analysts, SOC analysts like Network Miner, loads of resources from the UK Cyber Chef, allowing you to obviously encode, decode, encryption, strings, data, all sorts of things where you can go along and do some cyber bake-in. And if we just open it up real quick, you'll see it is installed, and it's installed locally. But when you go along and you look at the about, anything that is created by the United Kingdom government is always going to be copyrighted to the Crown. That's the royal family. So no real updates. And if you go along and look at what sorts of things you can do with CyberChef, pretty amazing. And then finally, if you go along to the GitHub website for the GCHQ tool, you can see there it is open source now. But of course, like you can see when you look at the actual options and about, even the local installed version, like we pointed out before, anything that the United Kingdom government creates, it's going to be actually copyrighted underneath the Crown copyright, whilst in the US it works very differently. So they actually publish open source stuff, and that's where you can see some of the wonderful open source tools from Ghidra as an example, to an array of amazing tools. So if you go to the code.nsa.gov website, you'll see there's a ton of open source tools you can use as well to try and detect certain attack vectors and Well, there's just too many to mention there, but there you have it. Some amazing projects that various different types of governments have been putting out. But right now, we're going to go ahead and we want to clone our Docker MISP. So we're going to go ahead and copy the actual URL there. So just go ahead and copy that. All right, so we're just going to be cloning the GitHub. All right, so when it's finished cloning the Docker container, should be just named docker-misp, which is obviously what you've just done the cloning of. And you could have changed it to whatever your name was, or the name you chose. All right, and as you'll see when you look at the GitHub getting started, once we've basically done the cloning, as you can see, we're now going to just go ahead and run the one command there, docker compose up. So you can go ahead and actually copy that command. And Docker compose up might take a long time depending on how fast your internet connection is. All right, now once it's finished actually cloning, remember, make sure you would have used root, so sudo before the actual command. And of course, if I just show you, because now it's all been downloaded, if I Control C, this is going to be a graceful way of obviously stopping everything. So it's going to stop all of your different Docker containers. And that was the basic command. So when you reboot your machine, or you've updated something, or you just started for the first time, what you're going to do when you want to start your actual MISP project, you're going to run your Docker compose up. And everything should already be there. Just make sure you run it as root, so sudo. And within a minute or so, it'll be ready to open up a browser, and we'll make sure we can actually connect and show you how to do the final step there, which would be adding the Microsoft Nobelium indicators of compromise. So if we go along and grab that information, so here we remember we're going to be able to copy the main list, and we're going to use some of the actual tools through the MISP project that's going to actually take all of these known indicators of compromise and going to allow us to actually copy it just by copying what's on the screen. So we'll go and grab that. Right, so just go ahead and copy that. And you can see all the various different indicators of compromise that we obviously want to add to our threat intelligence system. So there you can see we have our Docker, everything back up and running. And if you go back down to the actual website, the GitHub website for MISP project, well, actually, this is, remember, the custom cool asset folks that obviously put this all together. And here you're just going to go along and access the local host. Now, for the first time, you're going to have to actually use the admin@admin.test, and the password is admin. But you'll obviously be prompted to go and change that password, and then you'll have to create a user account. Right, so once you've logged in, you can go along to the add events, and you can obviously give it some details. So as an example, cyber CTI MS, whatever you want to put in there, and then extends event if that was applicable. But in this case, very important, you can see your distribution. Do you want this to be shared in the entire organization, this community only, connected communities, or all communities? So let's say I'm going to go along and say your organization only, and then your threat level, we'll submit that. And once we've submitted that, we're now going to go along and add the actual indicators of compromise. And to do that, we're going to go along and highlight over these various different bars, as you can see there. It's just, if you hover over it, will say populate using the free text import tool. And when we do that, we'll make sure we've got the indicators of compromise again, copy that, go along and paste it, and submit that. Now, of course, you can then go along and obviously change some of the categories, the types, IDS, and of course, there's a ton of information and tutorials available on the main MISP project website. So this is near production ready, of course, and of course this is open source and free. So hopefully you've all gained some great insight, and this is where you can of course use some of those commercial solutions as well. But if we learn on the open source tools, it really helps us learn to do our job where we can use any platform. So as a cyber threat intel analyst, you're going to be expected to be able to use the method, the process, the methodology that you're going to be following through when you're working in different cyber threat intel positions. So level 1, level 2, level 3 for SOCs and so forth. It all depends on the size of the company. But once you've got everything that you wanted, you can put additional comments and tags in there. You could then just go along and submit those attributes. In the last few minutes, just wanted to leave you some of the tools you definitely want to look at as a cyber threat intel analyst, either in the making or keeping your skills up to date. AnyRun is a great service. Obviously, you can use it with a free account where you're still able to actually go through, and it's a sandbox environment that allows you to do a lot of amazing dynamic analysis. So when you go along and run like a PDF document, or let's say you want to go and check to see if there's anything malicious in the PDF document, you definitely don't want to go along and run that in your Windows environment, because that's very likely going to be infecting that machine. But anyhow, that's AnyRun, where you can go along and download live samples, and you can specifically choose what kind of tactics may have been used. And the hybrid analysis, another great website as well, which could be used there as well. And then other types of sites like making sure you've set up Zeek before, Zeek, Suricata, all very important frameworks and tools. Zeek being an open source network monitoring tool, and anomaly type IDS being all open source. And then your usual Wireshark and so forth. Alrighty folks, I wanted to wrap it up with a quick overview of the Uber breach, and you can see the cyber threat intel flow that's coming out through the line so far. Obviously this is just one user's perspective. You can see the actual source, and very often we want to make sure we collaborate in the communities, and this is where you'll see a lot more information coming out of the woodwork, so to say. So there we can see some of the responses to some of the communication. You're going to get a lot of information from these resources. And finally, just wanted to say thank you so much, so kindly, for sharing your time with us. It was a great honor and a pleasure to be presenting this workshop to you folks. So hopefully everybody got some great information out of the workshop. And likewise, feel free to communicate with us. Contact us at cyber2labs.com, or all of you should see us in the LinkedIn, as you all have access to that information as well. So wishing you all the best for the future. Stay safe and carry on happy learning cyber threat intelligence.